Hey guys, we're back here with another snow day, believe it or not. So we're just going to finish up our notes today. I'm going to give you some time to read because it is our R&R day, and then encourage you to keep working on your exercise packet if you have it with you. I will also be posting an Ed puzzle for the second crash course that deals with the urinary system. So the Ed puzzle will be what I am grading for today, so please make sure that you complete that before 3 p.m. to be counted present for the day. So last time we were together, we were talking about this diagram, which basically shows all the different substances that can be reabsorbed. Remember that reabsorption means that we are taking it from the renal tubule back into the bloodstream, or can be secreted, which would be the opposite direction. We're taking things that are in our blood and we're adding them to the renal filtrate so that it can be excreted as urine. So just a reminder that water is going to be variable, especially in the collecting duct. In the collecting duct, if we have a lot of ADH, then we will be creating a concentrated urine. If we don't have much ADH because it has been diluted by drinking a lot of fluids, then we are not going to be reabsorbing a lot of water. So we're going to create a lot of dilute urine. So that is the main way by which your body is going to regulate your water balance and create the type of urine that your body needs to stay in homeostasis. So this end result of all of these processes is this wonderful yellowish structure called urine. And the urine can actually be very medically important. It can tell us a lot about your metabolism, about how your kidneys are functioning, and of course be used for things like drug screening. Now, drug screenings aren't just for people that are suspected of using illegal drugs. They can also be used by doctors if you've been prescribed a medication and they want to know how quickly your body metabolizes it. So there are many, many different applications. We're going to do um, a model urinalysis lab next week or maybe the week after, depending on how this weather shakes down, so that you can kind of see the process and see what types of things that they can be testing for. So normal urine, you should produce between 1 and 2 liters per day if you are well hydrated and drinking enough fluids. Normal urine should be about 95% water and 5% electrolytes. And as we've mentioned a few times before, there should never be protein, glucose, white blood cells, or any type of pathogen, so bacteria, microorganisms in that urine. So what they're specifically looking for are any of these things that shouldn't be there that are in there, and just the overall production of urine. Diseases that are going to affect the kidneys will alter the composition of urine and the amount of urine that is produced. So here is a nice infographic showing all of the ins and outs of urinalysis. We will be doing one like is shown on the bottom here. So we won't be looking at it under the microscope because it's not real urine, it's just fake urine. But we will be dipping these test strips in there, and each little color will represent one of the features here listed. Things like pH, presence of blood or proteins or glucose. And so it's kind of a fun lab, a little gross, but sometimes those are my favorite things if you haven't figured that out yet. So as the urine is moving down the ureter, it cannot be modified any further. It's basically just being held and transported until it reaches the outside of the body. So the rest of our urinary system we still have to talk about here. First, the ureters are just these muscular tubes, and they're going to move the urine from the renal pelvis. They're going to squeeze it down and then into the bladder. This is aided by gravity and some peristaltic waves that are with the smooth muscles that are found in those very, very thin tubes. Once the urine gets all the way down that ureter, it's going to enter the urinary bladder. Each ureter does have a separate opening in the urinary bladder, one for the left and one for the right. In total, the bladder can hold 700 to 800 milliliters, but that would be extremely painful. Most people are probably going to feel the need to go to the bathroom when your bladder's about half full. If you got to that capacity, you'd probably either wet your pants or be suffering from some type of possible rupture of the bladder, which would of course be very, very painful. So the urinary bladder contains that transitional epithelium, which is a really special type of lining on the inside, which makes it extra stretchy. And it has a bunch of different regions. If you want to pause me so you can copy these down, feel free. Otherwise, we're going to just jump right to the image because I do think that the picture is a little bit more helpful. Okay, so looking at our image of the bladder here, the bladder itself, as I mentioned, we have two ureters. Each of them have their own opening that go through the posterior side of the bladder. It has this kind of rough, bumpy surface that allows it, again, for stretching. We saw this with the stomach as well, and it actually has the same name, which is called the rugae. The trigone is the area of the bladder where we connect our two ureteral openings with the internal urethral orifice. So this space is extra special because the rugae are extra deep, and this is where we have the greatest degree of compression that's available from those transitional epithelium in concert with the detrusor muscle. So this detrusor muscle is the combination of smooth and skeletal muscle that make up the muscular layer of the bladder. So you'll also notice that the urethra has an orifice, which is the opening, and a sphincter, which is that circular muscle that will open and close at its beginning and at its end. And so the one at the beginning is called the internal, and the one at the end is called the external. So just that tube in between is known as the urethra. So the process of voiding the bladder is called micturition, and it is a combination of voluntary and involuntary muscle contractions. If you think about like little babies right when they're born, they still do micturition because it's a reflex, and you only gain control of that around the same time that you gain control of defecation. And so this reflex, the feeling of urgency of having to go is the involuntary motion, the involuntary action, and then the voluntary action is going to be the relaxation of that external urethral sphincter, which will then void the bladder. So that would be the voluntary action that you just learn to do as you get older. That small tube is called the urethra, and as we talked about before, it's going to be very different in males versus females just because of the merging of the urinary and reproductive systems in males. So in males, because it is so much longer and it actually passes through several different structures, we classify it into different regions. Prostatic, when it's passing through the prostate gland, that's the most proximal region right after it begins and originates in the bladder. Then for a very short time, only a few millimeters, we call it the intermediate urethra as it passes through a connective tissue structure called the perineurium that kind of surrounds the entire pelvic cavity. And from there, it's actually outside of the body called the spongy urethra, which of course passes through the penis. So here is a view of those three sections. So remember, comparing to a female, that it's just a urethra from beginning to end. The male urethra is significantly longer. So from here, it is the prostatic urethra, and you'll notice here it merges with this other tube called the seminal vesicle. So that is actually where most of the volume of sperm comes from, or volume of semen comes from, except for the actual sperm, which comes from the testes, of course. So if we follow this big long tube all the way up, those two tubes merge, and then it becomes the intermediate urethra just as it passes through this connective tissue here. And then all the way down the spongy urethra to the external urethral orifice. So the sponginess is in reference to this erectile tissue that will help keep the urethra open. And we'll talk a lot more about the functioning of the urethra for the reproductive system in Unit 10. So one of my favorite facts about the urinary system, also the grossest, is the fact that when babies are growing in utero, their urine actually plays a really important role because that is what comprises the amniotic fluid. So here we're looking at an ultrasound of a fetus that's probably 18 to 24 weeks, about halfway through pregnancy, more or less. And so you can see its little nose and its little hands or feet here. This is probably its heart, its head, and its brain. This dark stuff around it is amniotic fluid, and that fluid kind of cushions, protects, and provides lots of important features for that baby in utero. And it actually is a result of this fluid, which is originally secreted from the placenta, or from the amniotic sac rather, being swallowed and re-excreted. So the baby does swallow that fluid and it pees it out, and then it swallows again and pees it out, and repeats this process for most of pregnancy. So this is really important to allow the kidneys to develop properly, and also allow the baby to hone those swallowing reflexes, because that's muscular, right? We talked about how that is a skeletal muscle contraction. So they have to have control of that in order to survive in the outside world. The urinary system is really well developed in that first trimester, along with every other body system. And the fetus will also use this fluid for practice breathing. The fluid will get pulled down into the lungs and then just breathed back out, and that helps to strengthen the diaphragm as well. So, like most other body systems, as you age, the kidneys can get less effective. We can have less blood flow, less functional glomeruli, and so that means less urination or less effective clearing of those medicines or toxins or fluid from the body. So that can lead to things like dehydration or susceptibility to kidney stones or urinary tract infections. So the urinary system has a couple important contributions to homeostasis. The first one is regulating your blood, and that includes the volume, the composition, and of course its pH. And the most obvious one is that it removes the water-soluble toxins and substances from the blood, most importantly urea, which is a byproduct of protein metabolism. Okay, so that wraps up our notes for this unit or for this chapter. Make sure that you check either Buzz or Schoology for the remaining assignments for today, and reach out over email or remind if you're having issues completing that assignment before 3 o'clock so I can mark you present for the day. Be safe if you guys are going to prom this weekend, and we will see you all on Monday.